Hey, what's up, guys? I'm making a lot of videos this week, or these last couple of weeks, which is a good thing. But this one is very special to me. It's always been a lifelong dream of mine to be at least in the same room as Frank Oz, the legendary Frank Oz. Voice actors of such very popular characters like Yoda. He's worked very closely with Jim Henson on The Muppet Show, Sesame Street, and all these other movies. He's also a really well-established director, and one of the first movies that he's ever directed was The Dark Crystal that came out in 1982. That movie has such a special place in my heart. I remember my mom renting it for me from the video store, and I watched it on VHS for the first time. And I remember there was just something special about it that really captured my imagination. And I'm sure a lot of people feel the same way too. But then I also remember every time it would play on TV, it was always accompanied by a lot of behind the scenes footage, like how they did certain puppeteering and how they controlled some of the characters, how Frank Oz was able to direct certain scenes and working with Jim Henson on all these things. It's definitely one of those like movies that are from my childhood that even to this day when I watch it, I still feel very special about it. It still feels new and fresh to me and very creative. It's a unique story. Jim did it without a care in the world. He was getting a lot of flack about it, but the story not making sense. It pretty much bombed when it came out, but it's become such a cult classic hit. And, not only Jim Henson was responsible for that, it was also Frank Oz. So I just came out of a special screening at Museum of Moving Image. You all know I love this place. And they're doing a kind of like a Frank Oz retrospective series that's happening through November. And the reason why I came today is because, well, my dream has been fulfilled. The great Frank Oz was in attendance, and he did a nice little Q&A after the fact. And it was just very special to be finally in the room with such a legend like he is, such an iconic person in this industry. And the Muppets and Sesame Street hold, there's just special things in my heart for those properties. And it's always been a dream of mine to be able to see Frank Oz and hear him speak about his experiences and all that. And that's what I was able to do today, and that's what I was able to record for all of you guys to watch and enjoy as well. I only got the beginning part of the Q&A. The questions that were asked by the audience I did not capture because unfortunately my phone battery was dying. So I wasn't able to do that, but I was able to get the official Q&A and talk after the film. At least you have 25 minutes of Frank Oz reminiscing about his time on the Dark Crystal and all that. And it's quite enjoyable, and I hope all of you enjoy it as well. So without further ado, here is Frank Oz discussing his movie, his first movie that he's directed, The Dark Crystal. Enjoy.
Coming out on such a beautiful day here in Spain. Thank you.
Uh, it's a gorgeous, gorgeous film. Every time I see it,
Yeah,
incredible achievement in terms of its production, but also just the story where it ends. It's gorgeous.
it's again, it's Jim's film. Jim asked me to direct it with him to help him direct his film because he had the vision, and he knew that we all have weaknesses and strengths. I had some strengths that could help him, and but it was his vision. And just at the end, we're all part of one. That's very much from Jim. That we felt we're all the same, all part, and that the healing of the two parts of ourselves are necessary. It's very much Jim.
It does feel like, not in the most obvious way, but in a real meaningful way, related to a lot of other elements of, in terms of Sesame Street, the Muppets, the idea that there are multiple versions of ourselves in us.
Yeah, and Jim was a very spiritual man. He was a Christian Scientist, but he was more spiritual than he was organized religion. And so this was very meaningful for him. As I recall, it began when Jim and Cheryl Henson were stuck in JFK at that time. Yeah, I think it was Idaho at that time, in a snowstorm. and they made up the story during that while they were there. Yeah.
And do you recall what elements fed into that? Like, because it seems the 70s philosophy and
Yeah.
sort of mysticism maybe factored in.
Yeah, I mean that was Jim. That he had a he felt there were different planes of existence. Um, he was very spiritual in that sense, and again, not organized religion necessarily, but he was very spiritual and had his own view of that there were other planes of existence that he would. And, I know when Don Salim died, and I was crying there in the workshop years and years and years ago. He just put his arm around me and said, "That's okay. We'll see him later."
So the concept comes from Jim, and then makes its way into a screenplay. But then also Brian Froud, is that like the in terms of the design of all this? Because the look of this is also something that I guess in conjunction with Jim came about.
Yeah, Jim saw Brian's work and loved it, and Jim loved working in details. As you can see, all the details of the costumes and the props, everything was all made for the movie completely. And when he saw Brian's work, he felt that fit his vision of the look of it, and so that's how Brian came about. And Brian would not only draw the characters, but also the props and things like that. And then the incredible sculptors. One was Lyle Conway, who actually did the plant Little Shop of Horrors, and they were incredible.
When you think about what's required to realize this,
Well,
I wonder to the degree which so there's a sketch, right? There's a sketch, there's a drawing, there's color design, costume design. How much that just simply dictates the practical solutions, or are there points where you're like, that's simply not possible, we need to redesign this, or does everything just simply have to be done based on the design?
Jim always did the impossible, and people would say, "You can't do that." Of course, Jim went ahead and did it. It's a tricky question. Usually, the usual thing in the business is that the script means everything. I believe that. But Jim didn't quite work that way this time. I think before I even joined, he was going to London back and forth where we shot this, and it was created. And he was using a laboratory. He was creating these characters and how the sketches would work and how the Gotham and all that stuff. And so while the script was being created, so it was a combination of a laboratory of all these artists making these things, trying to have them come alive while Jim was working on the script at the same time. And I think that kind of fed each other. And whatever Jim saw was possible. He made possible.
You see this and I don't see anything. So much was realized is sort of beyond what I could have ever imagined.
Yeah.
It seems the idea comes first and then the execution
Right.
is later. It's
Exactly.
not like, well, that's not possible, so we don't execute it.
That's right. That's not the mystics, yeah. You guys hear it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a drilling.
We gotta get out of here.
Yeah, there's a. Okay, it's coming on.
Yeah, somebody's screwing around.
Oh my God.
But that's the thing. Jim always.
Sounds like Walrus.
I'll continue. Jim always wanted. He never let any limitations stop him. He had an idea, and we just did it, and we just went forward without knowing what we're doing. And especially all the artists and artisans here just did it, and that's how I learned to work with Jim.
Since you were basically like helping him direct his film,
Right. While we were doing the characters also.
of course. I want to talk about that for in a minute, but I'm wondering if you had different jobs. Did you have different assignments? Like you handled one element and he handled the other, or you just kind of did everything together?
It's really hard because Jim and I are like brothers at that time, and still, And still there's conflict, but not from Jim's point of view, but from me, because no, because it's the first thing I ever directed. I mean, people, I did film editing and I did my short movies and things like that, but you don't jump to something like this. I mean, this is massive, truly massive. And so I was learning while I was doing. And so therefore, and I felt, the old thing, everybody's listening to Jim, but not me, And Jim was always so patient with me, always so patient. So the only problem was there that I was a little bit annoyed because I had my own feelings, but thank God Jim and I are so close, everything was fine. Um, but it was really, we had storyboards, we had Mike who was brilliant, and we worked with him and essentially we had a relationship that just connected. And so I remember, we're doing the Muppet Show or Sesame Street, and if I wasn't performing and he wasn't performing, we'd be looking at it at a take, and then we'd look at each other, and I knew what he was thinking, and he knew what I was thinking, and why we had to do it again. And so when that happens, it just kind of, it's very amazing. And so really, it's wherever the needs are every day, I would fill the needs that Jim needed, and Jim would fill the needs that I couldn't fulfill.
And then the other element, of course, as you mentioned, is you're also playing characters, you're
Right.
also performing, and you didn't, which it's interesting because you're doing less voice work in this.
Well, on purpose, I did this Skeksis at the Chamberlain, which I love. He's so written smarmy. He's like, I love the sinewy snake thing. It's just so stupid. He thinks people actually believe him, all he wants is power, and he's pretending he's a nice guy, and everybody can see through him. And then I did opera. And thank you. But Jim and I both talked about it and said, at that time, I'm not sure if I'd done Yoda or not, but at that time I'd done a lot of voices and he'd done a lot of voices, and we just said, let's get something fresh here, because I don't want some of my characters lingering in these particular characters, a different world. So on purpose we did that.
But so I'm just curious about that split in terms of you usually voicing your own characters and bringing and the casting of different people to take those voices and matching basically the physical performance with the voice.
Right. I'll tell you something about this. This is the strangest thing. This is something. When Jim created the concept of it, what we did is we didn't have dialogue for the Skeksis at all. No dialogue. It was all made. Then he and the writer, David, I think, made up a language that we couldn't understand. But there was a language amongst the Skeksis. Okay? But we couldn't understand it.
So it was not translated.
It was not translated. No, nothing. Because Jim and I we felt truly you didn't need that. Because while we were, it's really great cinema. Hopefully you don't need the words necessary sometimes. So we did that, and we finished the movie, and we showed it to the heads, and they said, what the hell is going on? And what had to happen then was go back to London, and every single scene, every single Skeksis character had to be rewritten and have words written that fit what was already shot. So everything you see there had to be written for the mouth openings as opposed to the reverse, which is, it was. And then we did a lot of looping.
It's like ADR at another level, right? To just have
my God,
make up something.
Oh my God, it was This is a massive film, and the idea that I think I wouldn't have been able to do Muppets Take Manhattan, and I wouldn't have been able to do Little Shop had I not gone through fire like this.
Well, I'll move on from this for a second, but I just think it's so distinct and different from a lot of this, of the work. The idea that, because you're an incredible voice performer, you're all incredible voice performers, to give up half of a characterization.
But we don't see it that way.
To another person.
We don't see it that way. We're not voice performers.
Right.
We're character performers.
But to have a character split between two people in that way.
That's unusual. It's rare, but because this was a different world. But you know, people always ask the same question about doing the voices. And we don't do voices. We're not voice people. We just don't. I'm not a voice person. What happens is you create a character, and then if the character is true, the voice comes. It just comes.
Right.
This happens, and that's happened through all the characters we do. You know,
Precisely because of that. That's why I'm wondering about, in a sense, having somebody give a different voice to something like that.
yeah. You know, I think you know I know I worked with a fellow who did Skeksis, and of course Billy Whitelaw is a great British actress, and Billy was fabulous, and she did opera, and so I worked with both of them and make sure that the intent of their deliveries and their characters was mine. I mean, it was very important when I did the Chamberlain, for instance, using my character as an example, on the set when I recorded, even though I knew it wasn't my voice, it was a scratch track, which a scratch track is you record something on the set, and then a year later, you re-record it so it sounds good. And so when I did it, I knew I was going on purpose because that was part of his character that he, you know, we all have the little ticks amongst us. We don't even know we do things. He doesn't even know he does that. he just thinks, I'm doing that. So we all have ticks and we all have blind spots, and that's his blind spot. He didn't know that. And so I had to make sure that a year and a half or 2 years later, whenever we did a recording, that he also was there with that. So that was all.
Do you remember? I mean, some of the things that were required for this are unthinkable. Like what are some of the hardest things that you had to achieve, whether it's in sort of realizing characters or realizing locations?
Well, it is so much. I mean, I tell you, Ozzie Morris, the great Ozzie Morris, shot this, and Ozzie did John Huston's Moby Dick. He got the Academy Award for Oliver. He got, you know, I mean, he was a top of the guy, and he actually before this movie, he shot. This is his last movie he shot. He shot Muppets Take Manhattan, the Muppet Caper first, and he shot this. And it was such a process. And even Ozzie, we were doing a second unit shoot. I was doing that with Ozzie, and it was probably the 6th month. And Ozzie said to me, "Will this never end?" It was even Ozzie, the great Ozzie Morris. But Jim Henson, he would never stop at anything. And so what was hard was, of course, one of the hardest things for the performers were the Skeksis, because they were on their they were just on their hind legs, walking all the time. That was hard. I think the Landstriders were hard too. I think at that time, you can see how crude. What year was this made?
82.
82. So that was about 45 years ago, right? So this looks very, very crude now, all the optical effects, which are now CG effects, but realize that that's all we had at that time. There's nothing, that was the best we could do. So that was kind of hard to do, something that really we, or Jim mainly, envisioned, but we couldn't quite get there because we didn't have the technology. So that was a little frustrating and hard. And certainly every day was a hell of a day because we used every single stage at EMI. And that's where I shot Yoda doing, I forgot which episode it was, but never I shot Yoda there years later too. In any case, it was a massive, massive project, and I'm so grateful to Jim that it gave me an opportunity to learn.
The plants are puppets.
Yeah.
That's the level of this.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, like, I don't expect you to know a number, but how many performers at once were performing in some of these scenes? Like dozens?
Oh yeah, at least. I mean, and not only that, but for instance, they're outside, the helpers. What happened was you'll see a scene with all the 12 Skeksis, or not 12, but 12. 10. And each Skeksis, like I had the Chamberlain on. Jim had the leader on, and Dave Goles had another one on. And so we had a small monitor here around our necks, and they had shoulder harnesses, it could take the weight of the character. And then Jim and I, there's an audio loop around every stage we were, and so Jim and all the Skeksis performers had earpieces that could hear Jim and me. So Jim and I could talk to them, and Jim and I could talk to each other, but they couldn't talk to us. And only because if they started talking to us, there'd be 10 people, 8 people, hey, Jim, Frank. So that's how we kind of communicated. But not only were there dozens of people doing the shots, but when the Skeksis were on, as soon as there was a cut, there probably were 3 people rushing on to each Skeksis. One came in quickly to lift the weight. The other came in quickly to have a hairdryer to dry the inside out because it was all sweat. And another came in just to help, with the sweat here. And so if there's 10 Skeksis, with those 10 people, add another 3 people, that's 30 people converge on the stage immediately. And then once we get going again, they go off. But it was, I remember I was doing opera, and you kind of make a decision. When you're in those characters like that, the sweat is so profuse, you're just bathed in it. And you kind of have a decision, because there'll be a 15-minute break, and thinking, okay, do I want to get out of this at this point? Because I know when I get back in, it's going to be clammy and sweaty still. So I decided just to stay in and live with the sweat, and
Was there a limit to how many shots you could do, or how long the shots could be, considering that?
Yeah. I mean, they were, like for instance, the Mystics, the artists you couldn't walk forever that way. It was really, really, really hard.
Well, what did that look like physically in terms of the Mystics? Was there a hand in the?
It was like this. And they would walk like that, and it was hell. It was just, the Jim would never stop with limitations, and then we had masseuses on the set because the poor guys were just dying.
That's, I guess, what I was referring to in the beginning. There's no oh, that's not healthy. Let's have a different shape.
Oh, you don't know Jim. Oh no, we did throughout the movies. I mean, we could not do what we did then now because of all the safety regulations. Jim is the one who put himself in worse danger more than us.
You last week when we were talking about Muppets Take Manhattan, you were explaining the process of basically, for you to be controlling the characters, you're beneath the floor that we see in the film. In this film, it seems like there's so many locations that we actually see the floor from above. And I'm wondering, basically, were there 2 versions of every set, one where you're underneath and one where you're not?
No, they were as the need arose. For instance, if we needed to have somebody as Jen, for instance, or walk across, we would use a fellow named Deep Roy, who at that time, you guys know him a little bit, he was a perfectly formed human. He was very short and very, very skinny. He actually did some exterior shots of Yoda too. But he when you see Jen or Kira walking, that's Deep Roy in costume. And then all of a sudden you cut, and all of a sudden you're in a waist shot, and now you're back to puppets. Okay? And that means and that's fine. But then if you're in a waist shot, the next cut, and a Gotham enters, then you've got to get down below. So everything has changed every single shot. Either above the thing, below the thing, lying on your floor, on your back, going on a dolly. Every single shot changes for the needs of what the shot is.
I'm going to go to some questions from the audience next, but before that, I wanted to just sort of a general question, which is, it seems from the outside that at this point of working together, you and Jim and the whole crew, that every project almost needed to be 10 times harder than the last one, or 10 times more ambitious. And I'm not saying it was about being hard, but it does seem like everyone is outdoing the next. Was that kind of fueling it in any way?
No, I don't believe that's what Jim did. Because again, Jim was our leader. He never told us what to do, but we always followed him because he's so generous. Jim was excited by things, and that's whatever he was excited about was the North Star. And if he was excited about something simple, fine. He was excited about something like Dark Crystal, fine. It was never trying to top anything. It was always just being guided by what was exciting to him, and then it became exciting to us.
Great. Okay. Some questions?
Well, I'll tell you one thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. When we finally finished it, okay, and we showed it finally after 3 years of work, minimum. Jim and I went to Hollywood and a big screen, and we showed it to the two main executives. And we were behind them about 10 rows, and they were in front of us. And there was a big place, huge. Anamorphic was a joy to shoot Anamorphic. But it was just of the four of us, okay? And we saw their end. And they just sat there for the whole thing after 3 years. And when it ended, they stood up and walked out. Never said a word to us. Never said a word. Because they didn't know what the hell they had, I think. You know? Because it holds, but at that time, this was like, what the hell is this? And the only good review we got, only one good review, was Variety. Everything else said it wasn't good.
It's kind of unthinkable to be dismissive towards something.
It's amazing. Yeah, it's amazing. But, you know, when you have an artist like Jim, what he lives for is to take chances and do the unexpected. And he was extraordinary. I mean, everybody expected him to do, Sesame Street movie or something. That's not Jim. Jim started as an experimental filmmaker, and my God, that's what he's going to be.
You look at the projects during this time; they're all sort of so. Set aside my sort of whatever the idea about doing yourself, but one is never the same as the last. Like you're just not repeating yourself.
Yeah, I don't know what that's about, except that there are so many creative parts of Jim that, again, it happened to be that something, and by the way, Sesame Street still excited Jim doing that, and Muppet Show and things, but he had so many avenues of creativity that it was very organic. It wasn't, oh, I've got to top this. It was just very organic. Oh, this is exciting. Let's do this. Oh, this is fun. Let's do this.
Was there overlap between productions of this and Muppet Caper or Dick Manhattan? Because like they're
Yeah, I mean, Muppet Caper was before this. And while this was going on, at least in post-production, not Muppet Caper, I mean, there was pre-production working on this. Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. Let's get a few questions from those. Craig, help me out.
Yeah, right over here.
Go ahead.
Hi, there's a few Lucas